everyone, and welcome in. Today's video is going to be of a bit more serious nature than some of the others I have done about filming locations and travel destinations. Today we are going to be visiting and exploring the Chappaquiddick Incident of 1969. Sometime around midnight between July 18th and July 19th, 1969, the Chappaquiddick Incident occurred where Senator Ted Kennedy and young 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne had a horrible accident that changed both of their lives forever. I'm going to show you where everything happened. I'm going to take you to the cottage where the party occurred. We're going to go take a look at that bridge where the car plunged into the water. And we're going to show you the path that he would have followed that night when he walked from the bridge all the way back to the party house without seeking any assistance. We just got off the Chappaquiddick Ferry from Martha's Vineyard. We're now in the parking lot on the Chappaquiddick side, and we're going to go down and we're going to start taking a look, so I invite you to come along. As we make the drive to Lawrence Cottage, I want to take the opportunity to tell you about the true victim of this incident, and that is Mary Jo Kopechne. Mary Jo Kopechne was born on July 26, 1940 in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. She was the only child of Gwen and Joseph Kopechne. Kopechne was part of a Polish heritage through her father. When she was an infant, her family moved to Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. She was raised Catholic and attended parochial schools, graduating in 1958 from Our Lady of the Valley High School in Orange, New Jersey. She graduated with a degree in business administration from Caldwell College for Women in 1962. She was inspired by President John F. Kennedy's inaugural command, "Ask what you can do for your country." She volunteered for JFK's presidential campaign while still in college. After graduating with a business degree, she moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where she worked for a year at the Mission of St. Jude, which participated in the Civil Rights Movement. She also taught business classes in typing and shorthand at Montgomery Catholic High School, and she was an advisor to the school newspaper. One former student recalled her as a petite strawberry blonde with pep in her step. She had confidence and a zest for life that was intriguing. She was humble and kind and stood firm in her beliefs. By 1963, Kopechne relocated to Washington, D.C. to work as a secretary for United States Senator George Smathers. She joined the secretarial staff of Senator Robert F. Kennedy following his election in November 1964. For that office, she worked as a secretary to the senator's speechwriter and as a legal secretary to one of his legal advisors. She was said to be a loyal worker. Once, during March 1967, she stayed up all night at Kennedy's home to type a major speech against the Vietnam War while the senator and his aides made last-minute changes. She enthusiastically played on the Kennedy office softball team, playing catcher. During the 1968 U.S. presidential election, Mary Jo helped with the wording of Kennedy's March speech that announced his presidential candidacy. During his campaign, she worked as one of the Boiler Room Girls, the affectionate nickname given to 6 young women whose office area was in a hot, loud, windowless location in Kennedy's Washington campaign headquarters. They were vital in tracking and compiling data and intelligence on how Democratic delegates from various states were intending to vote. She and the other staffers were knowledgeable politically and were chosen for their ability to work skillfully for long, hectic hours on sensitive matters. She has been described as hero-worshiping the senator. Mary Jo was devastated emotionally by the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy in June of 1968. After working briefly for the Kennedy campaign of George McGovern, she said that she could not return to work on Capitol Hill, saying, "I just feel Bobby's presence everywhere. I can't go back because it will never be the same again." But as her father later said, politics was her life. By mid-1969, she had completed work for the eventually successful mayoral campaign of Thomas J. Whelan in Jersey City, New Jersey. Mary Jo was on her way to a successful professional career. One of the political professionals who worked with her in Jersey City has characterized her as an exceptionally hardworking and skillful professional who knew her craft. Mary Jo lived with 3 other women in the Washington neighborhood of Georgetown. She was a fan of the Boston Red Sox. She was a devout Roman Catholic with a demure, serious, convent school demeanor and rarely drank. So right now I am standing at the intersection of Chappaquiddick Road and Dyke Road. You can see Dyke Road back there. It's a dirt road. We're going to go take a closer look at that in a minute, but I just kind of wanted to give you a view of the entire area. As you can see, Chappaquiddick Road here is a natural curve. Okay, it goes back there. You can see the natural curve in the road and would lead back to Lawrence Cottage, which is back there. So on the night in question, Senator Ted Kennedy would have been driving this way and by all natural accounts would have naturally followed the road, the curve in the road, which would take him back to the Chappaquiddick Ferry. But instead, he made a right, a hard right, onto a dirt road. He was familiar with this area. He had been here before. He had been here earlier that day. After he was picked up at the airport, he was chauffeured over to the cottage, changed into swimming trunks, and was taken over Dyke Road, over Dyke Bridge, so he could do a little swimming. He knew what it looked like. He knew what the terrain was like. And of course, he went back to the cottage, changed his clothes, and went on, with his day. There's no possible way to turn right onto a dirt road from a smooth paved road and not realize the surface you're on feels a little different under the wheels of your car. Sorry, this is such a mystery, an unsolved mystery. We'll never know. There may not even be any point in doing this video. He's taken his secrets to the grave. But I just wanted to come here and see it myself. Kind of wanted to share the story, and I also want to talk about the true victim in this, and that is Mary Jo Kopechne. So we will get to that as well. But this is where, well, not the accident occurred, but this is what led to the accident. An accidental oops turn off of a smooth paved road onto a dirt road without even realizing it. You be the judge. Let's go take a closer look. So this is where the road changes. You can see here, this is smooth asphalt, well, as smooth as asphalt can be. And you can see right here, the asphalt stops, the dirt road begins. It's dirt, it's sand, it's rocks. You can imagine what it would feel like driving over that. So nobody knows the truth. Everybody's going to have their opinion about this. But it would appear to be very difficult to accidentally make the wrong turn and not realize it given the difference in the pavement. So I just wanted to give you an up-close look. This right here is the Lawrence Cottage. Ted Kennedy had come to Martha's Vineyard to participate in the 1969 Edgartown Yacht Club regatta. Joe Gargan decided to use the occasion to have a reunion of the Boiler Room Girls, as they called themselves. The Boiler Room Girls were 6 young women who had served on Robert Kennedy's 1968 presidential campaign that ended abruptly with RFK's assassination. Working on that campaign, that group had become close, and so after Kennedy's assassination, they had gathered several times to remember him, to honor him, and to be together to share in their grief. So Gargan decided to use the occasion of the Edgartown regatta to have another one of these get-togethers. Gargan rented this secluded Lawrence Cottage for the weekend on Chappaquiddick Island. Again, you can only get here by that ferry. This is where they hosted a cookout party at 8:30 p.m. that evening. 6 of the Boiler Room Girls attended the party. Of course, Mary Jo Kopechne, Rosemary Keogh, Esther Newberg, sisters Nancy and Mary Ellen Lyons, and Susan Tannenbaum. These young ladies could be best described as impressive, college-educated, frighteningly intelligent, politically astute, capable women. They were all in their 20s, and they were all single. Gargan was a practicing lawyer who had always been tirelessly and immediately available to the Kennedys for years in any capacity that they needed him. He had an instinctive gift for making people feel good and making those Kennedy campaign workers feel noticed and appreciated. So it would make sense that he would be the one to organize this event. The Boiler Room girls had scattered to other jobs after Bobby Kennedy's death, so he was looking ahead to 1972 when Ted Kennedy, he might need them again. He might need them again for his own presidential campaign. So again, it would make sense that Gargan would use all of this to plan this event at this secluded little cottage on Chappaquiddick Island, just a ferry ride away from Martha's Vineyard. The men at the party included the crew of Kennedy's sailboat that was entered in the regatta, including Joseph Gargan. Also, Paul Markham, a school friend of Gargan who had previously served as the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts. Also in attendance was John B. Crimmins, age 63, a longtime political associate of Kennedy, who served as his chauffeur for the weekend. Others in attendance were attorney Charles Tretter, a Kennedy advisor, and Raymond LaRosa, who had worked on Kennedy's Senate campaigns. All 6 of the men were married except for Crimmins, and their wives were not invited to the Chappaquiddick weekend. This fact resulted in rumors and innuendo. So here's where the story gets a little bit interesting. According to Kennedy, about 11:15 that night, Mary Jo Kopechne asked him to give her a ride back to the ferry so she could get back to her hotel in Edgartown. The Boiler Room girls were all staying in hotels in Edgartown, while most of the men were planning to spend the night at Lawrence Cottage. Kennedy himself had a hotel room at the Shiretown Inn in Edgartown. We'll be visiting that later as well. So according to Kennedy, he got the keys to the car from his chauffeur because he never did any of the driving. And he got in the car with Mary Jo, intending to make that last ferry because the ferry stopped running at midnight. That would explain why he said 11:15. It sounded like a reasonable story. And when they got to the end of the road, he should have just continued to follow the curve on the paved road, which would lead back to the ferry, but he didn't. He made that abrupt right onto that dirt and gravel road. And what lied ahead changed history forever. But the time of 11:15 isn't so much what's so important. The real question is, what the hell was he doing in the car alone with a 28-year-old girl? Obviously, it raised some eyebrows. So here's another interesting thing. If, in fact, she was going back to the ferry to go back to her hotel room, why did she leave her purse and her keys at the cottage? That would certainly suggest that she planned to be returning to the party, in my opinion. Again, everybody's going to have a different opinion on this, and that's perfectly fine. So again, it's not so much the time that is of importance because there is some contradiction to that. There is some belief that it wasn't 11:15. There was a witness, which we'll talk about later. But 11:15 kind of supports the story. Oh, I was taking her back to the ferry, because otherwise why would he have been in the car with her alone? But nobody, I think, really believed that. I don't think anybody believes this happened intentionally. It was an accident, a tragic accident. But I think the general public believes he was not telling the truth. It's only about a quarter mile from the intersection of Chappaquiddick Road and Dyke Road. It is not very far. The facts of the story just don't add up. We actually know for a fact that it was more likely around 12:45 because he was observed. He and Mary Jo were observed in a parked car. Deputy Sheriff Christopher Look was playing security guard over at the Edgartown Yacht Club for the races. And after he got off duty, about 12:30, he got over to Chappaquiddick on the ferry, came down that road, doesn't take very long, and right where Chappaquiddick Road meets Dyke Road, just past it, he saw a parked car with a man and a woman in it. He decided to get out of his car and approach the vehicle, thinking they might be in danger. But as he approached, the car suddenly took off. Common sense would suggest the senator did not want to be seen alone in a car with a 28-year-old blonde. Unmarried blonde, by the way, when Mr. Kennedy himself was married and known to have had several marital affairs. So it seems like some of the story was just made to kind of cover up whatever was going on. Were they off to have a romantic tryst? Or they off for an innocent walk on the beach? That could be too, but it wouldn't look good. This was a man who planned to run for president. So those facts just don't add up. And we'll talk about a few more details next. Right now we're going to go ahead and turn onto Dyke Road and see what it feels like. Ugh. Okay. Definitely a little bump. Oh yeah. Definitely a little bumpier than the paved asphalt road, for sure. I can't even keep my camera straight. That's how bumpy this is. Oh my God. Holy cow. You know, I've been trying to remain a little open-minded about this, but after being on this road myself right now, I don't know. There's no way he accidentally turned on this road and didn't realize he had made a wrong turn. There's no way. I hope it comes through on the video how rough this ride is right now. And we're in a truck. Pretty good truck. Solid, heavy truck. It would have been far worse in his, I believe it was an Oldsmobile. Ugh. Alright, so we've made it down that very bumpy 3/4 mile long road, and we have arrived at the bridge. So I'm going to turn the camera around and show you, and we'll take a look at where this tragic accident occurred together. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and approach Dyke Bridge. Before we get there, I will point out that at the time of the Chappaquiddick incident, the railings that you see on either side of the bridge did not exist. All this was a little wooden bridge over this pond. That's it. And hopefully you can make out that, well, let me see if I can show you. If you're coming down this road and you just come straight down, well, there's kind of a jog off to the right to get onto the bridge. So imagine yourself speeding down this road at 20 miles an hour, which is what the police officer testified, the one that saw them in the car. It's dark. There's no light out here. There's no lights. This is a beautiful natural area. There's no railings. You have to kind of swerve to the right to get onto the bridge. And from what I read, all the locals knew that. All the locals knew, you know, this was kind of a treacherous bridge and you had to be extra careful. Right about here, right here, in this area here, is where the car went off the road, off the bridge, into the waters below. Right here, down this little embankment, we find a little marker to pretty much memorialize the spot. Right now I'm standing in exactly the spot where the car went into the water. You can kind of see how this type of accident would occur if they were speeding down that road at 20 miles an hour, as the deputy had testified. It's dark out here. There's no railings, and you have to kind of make that little jog. You can kind of see how this accident might have occurred. So in my research, I read that a fraction of a second before he went over, you know, he might have realized the problem and braked, but it was too late, and over the bridge he went. It's pretty windy out here today. As for Mary Jo, you know, one of the most tragic things about this is that But forever, she's kind of known as the girl that was with Kennedy in that car, and her morals or whatever, her judgment maybe are in question by some people. But you can kind of understand it. Senator Ted Kennedy was a very powerful man, right? And some women are just very, very attracted to powerful men. I mean, look at Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, right? So you can kind of see the young, beautiful girl, Kennedy, senator, about to probably run for president. You can kind of see what might, if there was anything going on, and I'm not saying there was, you can kind of see the cause for the attraction. Then again, on the other side, I've heard stories that she was just, she wasn't someone that would be involved in something like that. She was just college educated. She had a great political career ahead of her, very smart. Some people, Rosemary Kehoe, who did an interview years later, and she just wasn't the type to go off and have a tryst with a married man. So we will never know, and that's why 6 years later people are still talking about this, because there are no answers. Again, I think it's pretty much agreed that he wasn't driving her back to the ferry. Something happened. What the true intentions were, no one knows. I've heard, testimony to both sides of the issue. At this point, it doesn't matter if he, was up to something illicit. I mean, he paid the price because of the Chappaquiddick Incident. His opportunity to run for president, it died along with Mary Jo. Another reason some don't believe the story is because earlier in the day, Mr. Kennedy had come here to do some swimming. Once he got to the cottage, he changed into his swim trunks. He was driven over here, and he went for a swim in an area called Tom's Neck. So he was familiar with the fact that that's a very kind of bumpy dirt road. He was familiar with the fact that this wooden bridge was a little, looked a little ominous, if you will. He had been here before that same day. So that's why the accidental turn, didn't realize it till it was too late. The story, it just doesn't hold water. So after Kennedy skidded off that road, he was somehow able to swim free from the vehicle. But Kopechne, Mary Jo, was not. Kennedy always maintained that he didn't know how he got out of the car. All he said in testimony later on was that he remembers that sensation of being completely out of air and inhaling water and assuming he was going to drown. He didn't think anyone would be looking for them, so somehow he got his way out of that car alive, and he later said he didn't really know. He didn't know how. On this other side of the bridge here, you can kind of see the tide moving in. Kennedy did state that he was swept by the tide that was rushing through for about 30 feet. He landed on a far bank about 30 feet away, down from the car. Right here is where that submerged car would have been. He said the car headlights were on, and he could make out the position of the car. He later testified that he called out Mary Jo's name several times from the shore once he got on the shore, and he did try to swim down to reach her 7 or 8 times. He claimed he did this for a period of about 15 minutes. Clinging to that undercarriage of the car while he was doing this and trying to get to a window or a door to free her. He said he would come up for air every once in a while, but be swept down again by the current and would try again. This is what he said in the testimony when there was a trial for this later on. Kennedy said that unable to hold his breath any longer, after that last dive, he let himself float over to a near shore and lay spent and exhausted on the grass. He said he rested there for about 15 minutes, and then he began walking back to Lawrence Cottage, and he estimates that to be about 20 minutes before 2. I'm going to drive back and show you the path that he would have followed on that walk back to the cottage. Kennedy then began walking back to the Lawrenceville cottage. It took him about 15 minutes, and he claimed he didn't see any lights, any houses with lights on, or anybody that could possibly help him. The fact is, he did pass by several houses, one of which is only about 150 yards from Dyke Bridge. And he passed by a fire station. So we're going to show you the path he would have walked right now. All right, we are going to start driving back. This is the path that he would have walked back to the cottage. Now, he denied seeing any houses with any lights on. However, just ahead on the left, you're going to see what a short distance it was to the first house. We're going to pause over here when we get here. Right here on the left. Do you see this? This house. Right here. The owner, whose name I'm not sure I can pronounce correctly, Sylvia Malum, stated she was home with her family and she had left the porch light on when she retired for the evening. And she had a telephone and it was working. So perhaps if Kennedy had stopped here, knocked on the door, and used that phone, Mary Jo could have been saved. But he didn't. He continued to walk home, and we're going to show you that path now. Now, as we drive down this road and retrace the steps he took that night on that walk back to Lawrence Cottage, you will see more than 4 homes. And that is because there has been quite a bit more development in the years since the incident occurred. As we mentioned, that first house was Dyke House, only 150 yards from the bridge. A few feet further on the opposite side of the road, at the Smith Cottage, which is set a little back further from the road, there was a nightlight of some sort on in one of the children's rooms which faced the road. Around the bend, once you get to the hardtop road, the Foster Silvas had gone to bed at about 1:30, but a small light burned night and day at the fire station, practically directly across the street from their house. And you'll see that fire station when we approach. However, Senator Ted Kennedy was not seeking help for Mary Jo. Unless by some miracle Mary Jo had gotten out of that car and was somewhere out there in the darkness, help would be unavailing, because Senator Ted Kennedy was heading back to the safety and security of his friends. Kennedy continued walking until he finally arrived at the Lawrence Cottage, where the party was still going on. It had lasted much longer than expected, well past midnight into the early morning hours. People were having a great time. And it was reported that at 12:45, Senator Kennedy, who had been talking with Mary Jo, stood up abruptly, asked for those keys, and went out the front door with Mary Jo following. Upon his arrival, rather than alerting the guests to the incident that had occurred, he quietly summoned Gargan and Markham. Kennedy's first words were, "The car's gone over the bridge, and Mary Jo is in it." His next words, "Get me back to Edgartown." According to Kennedy's first televised public address after the incident, he stated that Gargan drove the 3 to the site of the crash to try to rescue Mary Jo from the car. Gargan and Markham jumped into the pond, according to Kennedy, and tried repeatedly to rescue her, but were not able to due to the strong tidal current. This was omitted from Kennedy's initial statement to the police. Why? Was he protecting them, or was he protecting himself by fabricating this story? There's the fire station I had mentioned earlier on, and we're going to see Lawrence Cottage in just a minute so you can see just how close it was. And here on the left, by the green mailbox, right here, is the cottage. So I'm going to keep my camera focused right here, since this is actually, literally the spot where it happened. It wasn't until a short time, until about after 8 a.m. the following morning, when a man and a 15-year-old boy were fishing off of Tom Neck's Point, the same place where Kennedy had swum, like just the day before. What a coincidence. It was then that they noticed the submerged car in this pond right over here. And of course, they notified the police. I'll say that again. The car was discovered by a man and a boy after 8 a.m. the following day, and it was they who contacted the police, not Mr. Kennedy or any of his entourage. So the Edgartown police chief, James Dominic Arena, he arrived on the scene about 10 or 15 minutes later, and he said he could see Mary Jo's feet through the rear window of the submerged vehicle. He tried to inspect the vehicle, and then he contacted a trained scuba diver who had the skills and the equipment to go down there and to actually, pull the vehicle out of the water as well. John Farrar arrived at 8:45 with the scuba equipment and everything that would be ready, that would be required to get that vehicle out of the pond. And he discovered Kopechne's body in the back seat. So she wasn't in the passenger seat anymore, she was in the back seat, which will come into play a little bit later on. He extricated her body from the water within 10 minutes. I mean, that's all it took. He did not have a hard time at all. 10 minutes, and he was able to extricate her. The police then checked the license plate of the vehicle, and that's when they realized that it belonged to Ted Kennedy. Deputy Sheriff Christopher Look was also summoned to the bridge the next morning along with the other police officers. He was there when John Farrar, the captain of the Edgartown Fire Rescue Unit, brought up Mary Jo's body. When shortly thereafter the black old sedan with the license plate L78-207 was hauled out of Pucha Pond, he went immediately to another one of the officers and said, "Gee, that's the same car I saw last night." Look's version, if true, leaves over an hour of Kennedy's time with Kopechne unaccounted for before the crash. And there's no reason to doubt his word. He has no reason to lie. Now, of course, the original presumption was that Mary Jo had drowned, and there was no autopsy, but later on it was determined that she did not drown. When somebody drowns, you're going to find enormous quantities of water in every organ and orifice of their body. All they found in Mary Jo was about a quarter of a teacup of water, which would suggest this was not a drowning. Instead, it was later determined that what happened was there was an air pocket in the back of the car, and that's why she was in the back seat. She climbed into the back seat, probably trying to free herself or to stay alive by putting her head into the air pocket that was at the, it was a submerged vehicle. It was laying on its roof. So anyway, it was at the top of where, she would have been sitting. When they did retrieve her body out of the water, obviously rigor mortis had set in, and her hands were in a position that would suggest that she was clutching the back of the passenger seat, and her head was in a position that would suggest that her head was pointed up as she was trying to breathe in that air pocket. Another fact that supports this theory is that when they pulled the vehicle out of the car, there were air bubbles and the trunk was dry. So if it had been a drowning, that would not be the case. And that is just a little fact that makes the story even that much more tragic. Farrar, who had recovered Kopechne's body from the car, he said he was the one that indicated he believed she died from suffocation rather from drowning. Rigor mortis was apparent. Her hands were clasping the back of the car, the passenger seat, and her face was turned upward to indicate that she was trying to get to breathe in that air pocket that had been created in the back seat. Farrar publicly stated, this is just so hard. This is just so, and I know bad things happen every day, but being here is bringing it more to life. He believed that Kopechne could have been saved if a more timely rescue attempt had been performed. He believed she was probably alive down there for 3 or 4 hours, and if somebody had called for help, he could have had her out of there in 10 to 15 minutes, and she would have survived. That is just making this all that much more of a horrible, horrible tragedy. And that's why the fact that it wasn't reported is something that just doesn't make any sense at all. It just doesn't. So accident or not, you know, obviously it was an accident, but whatever your motivation was for going out, whatever that was, it doesn't matter. Why didn't you call for help? That is the question I would have for Mr. Kennedy. And unfortunately, he took the answer to that question to the grave. So I just discovered there's actually an additional marker here, a little memorial to Mary Jo right there. R.I.P. Rest in peace, Mary Jo. So before we leave this location, I just wanted to say one other thing. There is an alternate theory out there that perhaps it wasn't Kennedy who was driving the car. There is an alternate theory out there that perhaps it was Mary Jo herself. The theory goes that perhaps Mr. Kennedy got startled when the police officer saw them. Possibly he got out of the car and started walking back or something like that, and Mary Jo was the one that was driving the car. And the whole story about diving in and trying to save her, all of that was just made up to make him look good. You know, the theory also goes on that she was not familiar with the road. You know, she wasn't familiar with the curve at the bridge, whereas Kennedy was. So that's where this alternate theory comes from. I personally don't believe it, but it is an alternate theory that is out there. In any event, this is the spot where a beautiful 28-year-old woman who had a bright future ahead of her in the world of politics lost her life. And that is the real tragedy about Chappaquiddick. I know we get hung up on Kennedy and this and that. A beautiful 28-year-old woman with a promising bright future lost her life due to an accident, due to maybe a poor judgment by getting in the car with him, depending on what they were going to do. So this doesn't look great. I just picked these at Lawrence Cottage just to have something to throw in her gravesite and offer my own rest in peace, Mary Jo Kopechne, who did not deserve what happened. Now we are back at the Chappaquiddick Ferry. After Gargan and Markham drove Kennedy back to the ferry, this is where they would have been. And there used to be a payphone here at that time. I was looking for the payphone to see if it was still here, but obviously most payphones are gone these days. They drove him here and they told Kennedy that he needed to report the accident. Kennedy said that he would. And then Kennedy, since the ferries had stopped running, dove into this water, and hopefully we can give you a look at it, and swam across the channel to get back to Edgartown. Although he promised them he would call the police, he did not. Kennedy did not call the police until after 10 a.m. the following morning, and only after finding out that the submerged car with the body of Mary Jo Kopechne had been discovered. Meanwhile, as Kennedy was swimming across the channel, Gargan and Markham went back to the cottage, and they didn't say a word to the guests of the party that were still there. Instead, they told them that Kennedy and Mary Jo had gone back to their hotels, and everybody should just go get a good night's rest. So not only did Kennedy not report it, but neither did his associates, Gargan and Markham, who were both attorneys. The appearance is they were more worried about protecting his political future career than they were concerned with Mary Jo. So this is the area where Kennedy would have dove into the water. You can see the ferry is right there, and it just goes back and forth across the channel all day long. But this is where he would have dove in. There's actually a little like beach area here. So he could have just walked down to the beach, kind of walked in, and swam across back to the ferry terminal on the other side, which you can see right there. After that, he walked to his hotel, just about a block or two from the ferry landing, so we'll be going over there and giving you a peek at that as well. While we take in some of the scenery of Martha's Vineyard, I will add that after Ted Kennedy found out the car had been discovered, he did go to the police station to give a statement. He stated he was driving his car trying to take Mary Jo back to the ferry. He stated he was unfamiliar with the road, which we know isn't true. We know he did have some familiarity with it. And he turned right on Dyke Road by mistake instead of bearing a hard left. Also not true. It's not a hard left. We saw there's a natural curve in the road. If anything, you have to make a hard turn to get onto Dyke Road. After he gave a statement stating he walked around in a daze and didn't even know how he got out, he left without signing it. Since the reason that Kennedy was in town, the reason that party was being held that weekend was because he was going to be racing his boat, I thought it would be prudent to show you the Edgartown Yacht Club. So let me turn the camera around and show you. So this is the Edgartown Yacht Club. This is where Kennedy planned to race his sailboat Victoria in the 1969 Edgartown Yacht Club Regatta on Friday and Saturday, July 18th and 19th, 1969. He had foregone the previous year's regatta because of the assassination of his brother Robert that June. Thought I'd take a view from over here since there's some shadows at this time of day. Unfortunately, the senator finished a disappointing 9th. His nephew, Joseph Kennedy, 3rd, was in another boat, and he finished 19th. Ted Kennedy spent a few minutes on the deck of the winning sailboat congratulating the winner, Ross Richards. Afterwards, he went and checked into his hotel, the Shiretown Inn, and then he had his chauffeur drive him over to the Lawrence Cottage for the celebration. So this is that yacht club. And next we will be going and taking a look at the Shiretown Inn. It is no longer the Shiretown Inn, but the building is the same. This is the harbor next to the Edgartown Yacht Club, and you can see there's some pretty nice looking boats out here. Quite beautiful, in fact. So it's in these waters that the races would have began. The girls, who had mostly arrived on Thursday, they followed the race from a boat that Gargan had arranged for. This beautiful property, located at 44 North Water Street in Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard Island, used to be the Shiretown Inn. It no longer is a hotel, however, it is still a property you can rent in its entirety. It has been completely redone inside, and from what I saw on YouTube, it is quite exquisite. This is where Ted Kennedy came after the incident that night and went into his room. He said he removed his wet clothes and collapsed on the bed. Later on, after he recovered a little bit, he put on some dry clothes, came outside the room, and specifically asked someone, "What time is it?" It was somewhere around 2:30. Russell Peachy, who was co-owner of the Shiretown Inn at the time, was giving the place a last-minute inspection when Kennedy asked him what time it was. And the odd thing is, Kennedy complained of noise from a party in one of the other buildings. He claimed that this noise had awakened him. Peachy thought that was a really strange thing to do. There really wasn't any party going on, and he felt it gave the appearance of somebody trying to create an alibi. It is an absolutely gorgeous property. And inside, if you look it up online, you'll see it's been redone and it's absolutely spectacular. Back then, it was a little bit, it was an older building, so it looked a little more, a little different, but all of the architectural features remain the same. So another little interesting fact that came out in the investigation that followed was at 7:30 the following morning, the day after the sailboat race, Kennedy was speaking casually to the winner of that race. He was speaking casually, and he gave absolutely no indication that anything was amiss. How is that possible? How does someone do that? I just don't understand. At 8 a.m., Gargan and Markham, they had crossed back to Edgartown to meet up with Kennedy, and they were shocked to discover that he had not reported the incident to the police. Why? Why? Why didn't any of them report it, honestly? I just don't understand. You can see that the Shirestown Inn was pretty close to the ferry. This is the inn. And if I come down here just a little bit, down this beautiful street in Edgartown, lined with gorgeous buildings, lots of old whaling captain's home. You can see the sign indicating that the Chappa Ferry is just down that way. And if we take just a couple steps closer here, we'll find another sign indicating Chappa Ferry, right lane, through traffic, left lane. So you see that street just up there with the street sign? That is the street you would turn down to get to the ferry. So you can see how close that was to the Shirestown Inn over here. So supposedly after he swam across the channel, he walked from the ferry to his hotel over here, took off his wet clothes, and as I said, collapsed on the bed, awakening in the middle of the night to complain about noise when the hotel owner really couldn't hear any noise. Kennedy's room was up on the second floor. He had a little balcony overlooking the back area of the hotel with the pool. These are the steps he would have walked up that night, soaking wet, to go inside and get up to his room on the second floor. So that's going to just about do it for the Shirestown Inn. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next spot in this unsolvable tragedy. So right now I am standing in front of the Martha's Vineyard Airport. It's a small island airport right in the center of Martha's Vineyard. And on July 18th, 1969, this is the airport Senator Ted Kennedy flew into. He was on his way to Martha's Vineyard to race his boat in a regatta that weekend. And as we all know, the events of that weekend changed his life and changed history forever. This is it. This is the Martha's Vineyard Airport. Very beautiful looking little airport. And this would have been the airport that Senator Ted Kennedy flew into. But that's not all. This is also the airport he was rushed out of after the incident occurred. So there's two sides to every story. And in the years since the Chappaquiddick incident, it's been said that after the incident, they rushed everybody off the island. They rushed all the boiler room girls off the island in an effort to keep things hush-hush. Well, Rosemary Kehoe, none of the boiler girls actually spoke for years about the incident. It was a very painful, traumatic time for them. But Rosemary Kehoe did come out several years later and set the record straight with some facts. And she said that's not what happened at all. It wasn't that they were rushing them off the island, in an effort to keep things hush-hush. The police knew where they were. They had let the police know where they were. They let the police know they'd be available for questioning, but nobody called them, according to her. And so, yes, they did come to Martha's Vineyard Airport here behind me and get off the island relatively quickly. But according to her, according to the boiler room girl, Rosemary Keogh, it wasn't in an attempt to keep things hush-hush. Rather, they had just been through something horrendous. They were traumatized. They were in a world of hurt. Somebody in your close business family, people you work with, are close with, has this horrible tragedy. They were in pain, and they just wanted to get home. They just wanted to get home to their families. They wanted to get home to where they could feel safe and comforted. And so that was the reason, according to her, that they were rushed off that island relatively quickly. I mean, what were they going to stay for anyway? They came here to see the boat race. The boat race was over. The party was held. The incident happened. They let the police know where they were, said we're available for questioning. The police did not contact them, so they all said, well, let's just get out of Dodge. Can you blame them? So this next spot I want to show you is the County of Dukes County Courthouse. This is where Kennedy's court hearing was held just a mere 7 days after the incident, believe it or not. That's all it took. I'm going to go stand on the courthouse steps and read you a few facts. It's too much to memorize, so please allow me to just recite from my written notes. Come along with me, take a look at the courthouse. There are photos online of Mr. Kennedy standing on these very steps addressing the crowd. The Chappaquiddick Incident became national news that influenced Ted Kennedy's decision not to run for president in 1972 and in 1976. It was said to have undermined his chances of ever becoming president of the United States. After the incident, Kennedy returned to his family's compound in Hyannisport, where his numerous advisors gathered to advise him what to do. Smith, the Kennedy family business manager and master fixer, decided the political damage was catastrophic and eliminated Kennedy's chances to run for president in '72. He recommended Kennedy focusing efforts on protecting Kennedy from a charge of manslaughter. So Kennedy laid low at his family compound for 4 days, and he only emerged to attend Mary Jo's funeral, wearing a neck brace. Kennedy's court hearing was held right inside this building I am standing in front of, before the Massachusetts District Court Judge James Boyle on July 25th, a mere 7 days after the incident. Kennedy pleaded guilty to a charge of leaving the scene of an accident causing bodily harm and received a 2-month suspended jail sentence. 2 months. His attorneys argued that the jail sentence should be suspended, and the prosecutors agreed by citing his age, character, and prior reputation. Despite an Associated Press story published that morning, Boyle was unaware that Kennedy's driving record was, in fact, far from unblemished. While attending the University of Virginia Law School from 1956 to 1959, he had compiled a record of reckless driving and driving without a license. In one particular incident on March 14, 1958, Kennedy ran a red light, then cut his taillights and raced to avoid a highway patrol officer. When Kennedy was caught, he was cited for reckless driving, racing to avoid pursuit, and driving without a license. Boyle sentenced him to the statutory minimum 2 months in prison, which he suspended, saying that he's already been and will continue to be punished for anything beyond what this court can impose. And yet the rumors and the unanswered questions swirled. Kennedy's wife was pregnant at the time, but she had a miscarriage, something she attributes to the stress of the Chappaquiddick incident. So why didn't Ted Kennedy go to prison? Well, that's a real good question. That's something I've asked myself many, many times. To To charge Kennedy with involuntary manslaughter, the police would have had to establish that he did something illegal, like speeding or drinking and driving under the influence of alcohol. But Kennedy didn't contact police until after 10 a.m. the following day. It would have been too late to conduct a blood analysis because any alcohol in his blood would have dissipated by that time. In addition, they had no other evidence of any other illegal activity. It seemed to be just an accident, an unfortunate, tragic accident. And there's one other little tidbit that I thought was very interesting that probably helped this thing maybe go away a little bit. This all happened, the incident occurred 2 days before Armstrong landed on the moon. And so that's what dominated the headlines at the time and kind of helped this thing slide under the radar a little bit, just a little bit, because the nation's attention was on the moon landing, not another tragic incident that happens every day. So again, this is the courthouse where the hearing was held. It's right on Main Street in Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard. It's a beautiful building. And I just wanted to show you that and share with you that part of the story. At 7:30 p.m. on July 25th, Ted Kennedy delivered a lengthy statement about the incident broadcast live by 3 television networks. He explained that his wife did not accompany him to the regatta due to reasons of health. He denied engaging in any immoral conduct or driving under the influence of alcohol that evening. He said that his conduct during the hours immediately after the accident made no sense to him and that he regarded his failure to report the accident to the police immediately as indefensible. I agree. To the horror of Gargan's attorney, his statement revealed his enlistment of the help of Gargan and Markham to try to rescue Kopechne, despite the assurances he had made to the effect that he would not involve them. The speech concluded with a passage quoted from John F. Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage. A man does what he must in spite of personal consequences. Reaction to the speech was immediate and negative. District Attorney Edmund Dennis felt that Kennedy's televised speech left many questions unanswered about how the accident happened and his delay in reporting it. On July 31st, the same day Kennedy returned to his Senate seat, Dennis began the process of requesting an inquest. This inquest convened in Edgartown in January of 1970. At the request of Kennedy's lawyers, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ordered it be performed secretly, with Judge Boyle once again presiding. The 763-page transcript was released 4 months later. On January 5, 1970, the judicial inquest concluded that Kennedy and Kopechne did not intend to take the ferry that night, and that Kennedy intentionally turned towards the bridge, operating his vehicle negligently, if not recklessly, and at too high a speed for the hazard the bridge ahead posed in the dark. The judge stopped just short of recommending charges, and a grand jury convened on April 6, 1970, returning no indictments. However, Judge Boyle released the following findings in his report. Number 1, death probably occurred between 11:30 p.m. on July 18th and 1 a.m. on July 19, 1969. Number 2, Kennedy and Kopechne did not intend to return to Edgartown at that time. Kennedy did not intend to drive her to the ferry slip, and his turn onto Dyke Road had been intentional. Number 3, a speed of 20 miles per hour, as Kennedy testified to, operating a car as large as his Oldsmobile, would be at least negligent and possibly reckless. If Kennedy knew of this hazard, his operation of the vehicle constituted criminal conduct. Number 4, earlier on July 18th, he had been driven over Chappaquiddick Road 3 times and over Dyke Road and Dyke Bridge 2 times. Number 5, I believe it was probable that Kennedy knew of the hazard that lay ahead of him on Dyke Road, but for some reason, not apparent from his testimony, he failed to exercise due care as he approached the bridge. And number 6, I therefore find that there is probable cause to believe that Edward M. Kennedy operated his motor vehicle negligently, and that such operation appears to have contributed to the death of Mary Jo Kopechne. Having found probable cause of a crime under Massachusetts law, Boyle could have issued a warrant for his arrest, but he did not do so. Despite Boyle's findings, Dennis chose not to prosecute Kennedy for manslaughter. On May 27, 1970, a Registry of Motor Vehicles hearing resulted in Kennedy's driver's license being suspended for a total of 16 months. Well, that's going to conclude this video. I hope that you enjoyed seeing some of these locations as they exist today. I hope that this gave you a little bit better perspective of the true nature of the story. Again, it's been almost 60 years. We're never going to know for sure exactly what happened, but maybe by seeing some of these locations yourself up close and personal, maybe it'll help you form your own opinion if you don't already have one, or maybe it'll help change that opinion as well. Again, I'm not trying to exploit the Chappaquiddick incident. I did this for Mary Jo. She was an innocent victim of this whole incident, and she's the one that needs to be remembered. So I do this in honor of Mary Jo. I hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for watching. Be well.